Welcome to Choose Courage Inc., where we skip the boring intros and jump straight into reimagining business and workplace experiences with We Ain't Afraid to Go There conversations. I'm Vivian Castillo, and in this episode, I'm joined by Sandra Camacho, an entrepreneur who's been living in France for the past 12 years, to have an interesting conversation about moving abroad. And this is a conversation that I'm just hearing more and more of in light of what's happening sociopolitically in the United States and elsewhere. And so together we explore the practical, emotional, and systemic considerations of relocating to another country, regardless of whether it's for greater personal freedom, safety, or simply just a new chapter in life. This is not your typical how to move abroad checklist, because we also get into the invisible work, the inner questions, the financial recalibrations, healthcare realities, tax implications, and grief that often go unspoken in these typical shiny social media posts about living your best life abroad. Regardless, if you're considering a short-term adventure, a permanent relocation, or simply craving insight into what life abroad might look like for you, then this episode offers grounded wisdom and a healthy dose of unfiltered truths. And if conversations or topics like this light something up in you, whether it's a desire to build a life that feels more aligned with the quality you want, or even the desire to learn how to financially support yourself so that you can have more flexibility to move or travel, I want to gently invite you to check out my upcoming entrepreneurship group coaching cohort. It's designed for folks who are ready to move from contemplation to clarity and from corporate to creative ownership. It's also designed to be a healing experience. As someone who has also left corporate America to pursue entrepreneurship, I realized that I had to detox a lot of ways of thinking and behaving and feeling so that when I was building something new, I didn't bring all that garbage into this new venture. You can learn more about this at choosecourageinc.com, and I'll also place more info in the show notes of this podcast. Let's get into it. So maybe I'll just start by putting the question in the space for you, Sandra. I'm wondering, just from your perspective, what factors should someone consider when deciding if moving abroad is right for them?
Oh man, that's a big question to kick things off with. And obviously the first thing that's going to come to mind for me is really the financial situation that you find yourself in, because moving is expensive. If anybody, I mean, we've all likely moved to a different city within our own countries, but moving abroad, especially if you have established your life in your home country for many years, it just requires a lot of funds. And so it really just depends on how mindful you are in terms of what you're going to take with you, where you're going, what cost of living looks like. But to me, that was one of the biggest things that I thought about, because I moved when I was 25. So I wasn't earning big bucks. I was very early in my career. And I actually even considered moving as a student. And so moving abroad without reliable sources of income and a lot of unknowns. And there's also a lot of kind of upfront costs that go into, moving abroad when you're coming in, getting a new apartment, moving all your things over. It's just a lot, things that you have to pay out of pocket. So to me, I think that's one of the biggest considerations, is just being mindful of your financial situation and how secure and stable you feel and how much kind of risk you're willing to take. I could keep going, but Vivian, you tell me if we wanna kinda go back and forth, because there are lots of other
Yeah,
things besides that, but
yeah,
I would say, yeah, financial
let's
situation for me is one of the biggest things.
yeah. Let's go back and forth, because you're speaking from the perspective of you did this 12-ish years ago. You're on the other side of it. I'm coming from the perspective of I'm in the very deep research part of this. When I'm thinking about what are the things that triggered me to be like, I think it's time to think about moving abroad and the different factors of that. Part of it is just my emotional, physical, psychological safety, Black American woman living in the States. And I don't think my nervous system and my health can do this for another 4 years. I also have a kidney disease. And so, like, stress acts my health. There are other kind of things I've been thinking through as well in terms of just wanting to take better care of my body. So what does it look like to move somewhere where the food isn't designed to kill me? And then, as someone who is single and I'm in my 30s, so I also have to be thinking about, from a financial aspect, the ways that I might want to start just building my finances, thinking about retirement, right? In case I'm not with a partner, towards the end. So like those are just some like important things I've been thinking about. And in terms of money, I think money will always be a consideration in a lot of like our bigger life decisions. I think for folks where if you are kind of let me say this. I would say when it comes to money, I think part of it is making a decision of, are you going to shift your relationship with money? Because a lot of us are working for companies and organizations where we tend to be a little bit more passive in our relationship with money. Money's coming into the account and then it's, part of it's going to maybe 401k, it's going to these bills, what have you. But I think when you move abroad, you just have to be a lot more tuned in to your finances. You have to be thinking about, the conversion rate. You have to be thinking about how much do I want in savings potentially. So, but with that, I think introduces an opportunity to be creative because I also believe that a lot of companies that we work for condition us to not be creative with what's possible. So for some of you on this call who are feeling like, well, I already have this job or I'm kind of stuck with where I'm at career wise, you always have options and opportunity. I think it's just about we have to kind of recalibrate our relationship with fear and also what does it mean to be creative in moments and spaces like this. Curious, Sandra, if you've noticed that even within your own experience and how that's played out for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was just in such a different headspace and even stage of my life when I moved here because I was literally just in the earliest years of my career, so I wasn't really thinking too far ahead. And I have to say that for me, it was really like why money was so important is because I mean, we're going to talk about some of the logistical issues, is because it was making a huge difference on what visa I could actually move to France with. And I found that especially when if you're moving with your employer, you're moving with your company, which is the situation that I ended up in, there are a lot of times where at the time I just wasn't aware of as deeply of the concept of equity and how it pertained to pay, and especially as a woman of color moving to a new country where pay is a lot lower. And I found that there were just moments where I kind of wish I could have fought for myself because I am now, working for myself. I'm an entrepreneur. I left kind of the corporate world and I realized that decisions that I made 12 years ago and the way that I ended up here have had ripple effects over the past 12 years, both in positive and negative ways. So I do find that it is important, like you say, to kind of anchor ourselves in creativity, work through constraints, not let, negative messaging kind of hold us back from exploring the possibilities of moving abroad. But I do find that there is the importance of grounding ourselves in the reality of, moving and upheaving your life to a new country comes
Mhm,
with sacrifices, some of which may be financial, especially to countries where you're going to get paid less. Like the market rates are lower. And so there is going to be a change depending on where you are today. There is going to be a change in terms of your lifestyle and how, kind of how the market sees your worth, which is, I know, a very capitalist kind of way of looking at things. But unfortunately, that's just the reality that I've lived. But at the same time, I think that there's something we talked about this, Vivian, before of it's not about running away from something, but rather going towards something. And so for me, what drew me to this place in the first place was the culture and the language. Like I fell in love with the French language when I was 15. At the time, I had been studying it for 10 years. I had dreamt about living abroad. I had been here as a student. And so there was for me kind of like this strange soul connection to this place, even with a history of, colonialism and all the terrible things in Western Europe. But I did find that anchoring myself in kind of that deeper connection to the place allowed me to just kind of work through some of those obstacles that were more
mhm.
logistical. But yeah, having that be kind of the anchor, what draws you to go somewhere new rather than, again, escaping something that may not be so positive.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I'll run through a list of some more, like, nitty-gritty practical things that I've had to
Yeah.
factor and have been thinking through. So, is this gonna be a short-term thing or a long-term thing? If it's more of a short-term thing, then you're thinking about how much do I wanna sell, how much do I wanna put in storage, what's the cost of that long term? I'm kind of in this weird place where I'm like, I just if I move abroad, I don't know if I'll move back anytime soon, maybe ever. So you're now it's like math, right? Okay, like how much storage, would that cost me each month per year? Thinking about your mail. So, especially if you're like you have your own business, how am I getting my mail? So for me, that means setting up a virtual mailbox to be able to have my mail sent to me. I've been learning a lot about all of the loopholes with, I don't know, taxes and things like that. So there are a handful of states where there aren't personal income or corporate taxes. And within those states, most of the times when you have to get residency, you have to be there for 30 days, have a lease, have a car note, whatever, except for one state, and that's South Dakota. You only have to be in South Dakota for 24 hours and then you can be a resident. And you can, because if you are American, you will be taxed anywhere you go. We're just one of the two countries that does that. Wherever you move in the world, you're going to be taxed. So you have to kind of think about those things too. So am I going to fly to South Dakota for 2 days and become a resident? 100%. And I'm going to set up my virtual mail just so I can save money in terms of like my taxes. I have a dog. I have a Doberman. He's a lot. He's the love of my life. So it's like, how do I want to move him, right? Do I want him to fly cargo? Am I okay with him doing that? Do I think he's going to be traumatized? Do I need to look at the cost of someone driving him to Mexico, driving him part way, flying him the other? So some of those other logistics. I have a kidney disease, so I have to think about my nephrologist. And, health insurance is different in every country. So thinking about, are the medications that I'm on here, are they available where I'm thinking about going, which for me is Mexico, Peru specifically. So I have to do that kind of research as well. So yeah, those are like just some of the other practical things. And on the personal note, my nephews are like my heart. They're 5, 3, and 7 months old, and they're my heart. So there's some grieving, right, of not being able to go to their soccer games, and knowing them going to miss some of those parts in their lives. So part of it is for y'all, you have to kind of like think through what are those trade-offs? And how do you create space for that and just recognize that, yes, there is going to be some element of like loss and grief with this decision, but there's also going to be a lot of things like gained. Which brings us to probably and again, this will be different for each country, but there's a lot of legal visa kind of like considerations to consider. Curious, how did you navigate that? How did you navigate the legal and visa process with France specifically?
Yeah, and I would say that some of the experiences that I'll share relate to other countries in the Schengen zone for anyone that's considering moving specifically to Europe and not to the UK, but Schengen. So the EU countries that are part of Schengen. And what's really tricky about this is that I actually had planned to move here as a student, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. So that is an option that a lot of people, again, people who are a bit more on the younger side, but people also who want to consider going back to school, it is somewhat simpler to go to a new country as a student just because a lot of countries offer the path of converting a student visa to a full-time kind of working visa, or I should say work permit. And I think that that's something that's really important to get clarity on for whatever country you're looking to move to, is that distinction between either a temporary visa or a long stay visa, a residence permit, and then a work permit, because they're not the same thing. And what eventually happened is that I had the opportunity to actually, by chance, do a rotation program back in 2012 where I actually lived in Dublin for 3 months, which was just a really nice way to just live and work abroad, but just on a temporary assignment, and allowed me to kind of make a lot of connections in the space. And that's actually how I got the opportunity to move. I kind of put aside my dreams of going through a master's program where I'd have to leave my job and have financial security and lots of other things. It was easier to have the opportunity to go with my employer. So I think if that's something that you are thinking is even possible, like if you're at an international company, they have an office abroad, it's actually a lot easier, not from a logistical standpoint, but just long term, to be able to go over with a sponsored kind of work permit by your employer, just because it's going to ease a lot of difficulties and pains that you may encounter later on if you're trying to convert your visa. And if you're self-employed, it's a different story. So I would say that that's what was helpful for me, was to have the opportunity to go ahead of time, to make connections, to get the opportunity to qualify kind of for a transfer. But it took 5 months to get the work permit approved. And this is back in
Hmm.
2013. I don't know what it looks like these days, but the
Yeah.
thing you need to know, yeah, about the EU in particular is that you have to prove that no one else in the EU, so not even just in your country, but no one else in the EU is able to do the job better than you. And so there's lots of kind of documentation that the employer has to put together. They have to make, kind of a case to it's called direct in France, but to this kind of workers, I don't know, organization, and essentially, there's just a lot of paperwork. There are costs that the employer has to take on. And so they do have to show evidence that you are the right candidate. And it's harder said than done. I think if you're in a more senior role, it's gonna be a lot easier. But I was 25. At the time, I didn't qualify for the EU blue card, which I believe is still around. But it's just something to keep in mind that the visa that you get locked in, I got locked into a salaried worker visa that renewed every year, and it was a nightmare. So don't do what I did and try to push for if you're moving with your employer, you have the opportunity to do that, like getting a visa that is a multi-year visa. And something that you have to keep in mind that is really challenging, became a problem for me later on, is that a lot of those visas give you kind of a minimum number of years where you're tied to your employer, meaning you can't change to another employer even if you have the work permit. And so if you're in a toxic work environment, and it's something that happened to me, like you can have the sense of being trapped because you can't change employers for 2 weeks. So again, for 2 years. This is very specific to France and to the situation I was in, but it's
Yeah.
more you want to be very mindful, read the fine print of the type of visa or work permit that you're getting, because again, those are things you have to anticipate for the future. If your situation changes, you're in a bad employment situation or culture, you might get locked in because of your immigration status and the type of visa you have. So I know I went into a lot of logistics, but in some, read the fine print, try to
There's a
get
lot.
multi-year. Yeah,
That's the
multi-year.
TLDR.
And yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And also too, I don't know if y'all know this on this call, but Sandra and I are not attorneys. We're not accountants.
Yeah.
So like we're speaking from our perspective and our own like journey and discoverings, but you should always consult with someone else with this information. And to that end, visas are always changing all over the world. Like I think towards the end of 2025, Americans will need a certain kind of visa to go visit certain European countries. So that's new. So it's just changing all the time. And you have to, I think for me, the best way that I have had a pulse on kind of like visa things, legal things has been Facebook groups.
Yes.
So like I'm a part of a couple different Facebook groups, whether it's people like moving abroad in Mexico. I'm a part of a lot of like Black in Mexico City groups, Black in Querétaro, Mexico groups. So and I find those to be incredibly helpful because people are very generous in sharing resources, sharing kind of like questions that they have. And you're also with other people who are in a similar space. So I think it's just helpful to look. There's a ton of different Reddit threads on this. I personally don't think I encourage folks, if you're kind of curious in this initial phase, join some Facebook groups in certain areas that you're curious about with people who are moving abroad or have moved abroad. With Mexico, the visa process has changes all, I mean, just changed actually 2 weeks ago. But in general, you are allowed to get a temporary residency visa that lasts for 4 years. And then after 4 years, you can get a permanent residency visa. When you have your temporary residency visa, you have to renew that every year for 4 years. But then once you get your permanent residency visa, you have it for life. So, and again, each country will be different in terms of the level of difficulty to get permanent residency. But that's the thing. There's a couple ways within Mexico that you can get temporary residency, get a temporary residency visa. The first is financial solvency. So you basically have to prove to Mexico that you're making a certain amount of money each month for the last 6 months. Now, if you're moving to Mexico, my recommendation is to work with American clients who are paying you American prices and live in Mexico. I would not recommend to try and get a job in Mexico. I think you'll just have a better experience, like, financially, and you'll have a lot more, like, financial freedom when it comes to that. But for me, like, in terms of work, when I'm moving to Mexico, I'm gonna be working with still, like, my American clients, and they're gonna be paying the American prices, which is very different than Mexican prices. So with that, you have to have a certain amount. You have to prove that you are making a certain amount each month for the last 6 months, or you have to prove that you have a certain amount in your bank account and savings for the last 12 months consistently. What's interesting is each state, your Mexican consulate will have a different requirement for that number. So there are some states where if you're going for financial solvency, you have to show that you have at least 80K in your bank account for the last 12 months. There's other states and cities where it's only 70K. Same thing with the monthly. So there's like a whole like thing with that, which is why I dropped in the chat under Amy. Amy asked a question earlier. I dropped in something called the Mexico Relocation Guide, which is something that I learned from one of my Facebook groups I was a part of. And it just gave a lot of information about how to navigate that. Gave me kind of information on who I can connect with in certain cities, who can also be a facilitator, right? Especially if you're not like fluent in Spanish. You can have like facilitators who are local who can work with you in that. And then you're also, again, supporting like local folks. So for me, like a lot of my legal visa considerations came from going down Google, watching YouTube videos from people's own experiences with that, right? Being in Facebook groups and hearing from people about what's going on. But then also too, that gives you different ideas of what laws are changing and like what rules are changing. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really great point for any people considering moving to European countries that have a lot of bureaucracy. What's documented online does not always align with what you need when you're going either to get your visa for the first time or eventually if you're finally abroad to renew your visa. The requirements are constantly changing. Every kind of city or kind of local town is different. And so that's something that I definitely have learned through trial and error. And I shared also some other forums in the chat that I found super helpful. And I'm happy to share others if it's helpful. But yeah, really relying on lived experience because people are
Yes.
sources of knowledge, much more so than what you find on kind of official website, legal kind of government websites.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I know for Mexico, for really Central and South America, everything runs on WhatsApp. So if you also join these Facebook groups, you'll learn about different kind of like WhatsApp groups to join where you can learn more about whether it's healthcare, learn more about, food, whatever it may be. So again, if you're thinking about moving south in terms of that direction, that's something that is really important that you'll also be tuned into. And so with that, I just want to, what I'll say here is this. I think this is usually the part where people, because of fear and just the unknown, they like throw money at people or resources that say will make it easier. So, I think recently I saw this one, it was like conscious relocation support, I don't know, something like that. Conscious equitable relocation support. And it was about helping you to move abroad while keeping in mind, things like gentrification and all those things. But when I'm looking at the prices, so expensive. Whereas I can work with local folks where that is their business, where they're from Querétaro, and they're able to help me better understand the system, how to navigate things, how to get my driver's license. And I'm able to put money into their hands versus working with someone who's based in the States, based in Europe, who's helping me do that. So, but again, you learn that from being a part of these Facebook groups, these different communities. You learn that from just being curious and being on YouTube, seeing how people have been navigating this and documenting this. So I encourage folks, there will always be these moments of fear of the unknown, but I encourage folks to lean into this as a moment to be curious and to have fun and to learn. So, how do you approach things from a place of curiosity and wonder versus like fear and like the need for control? Will help to color your experience as you kind of like navigate the different legal and visa processes. I have a couple other comments on business legal things. Curious if you have anything to add to that, Sandra?
Specifically around business or just thinking legal and visas in
Legal,
general?
visa, before I kind of share a little bit about some business considerations.
No, we
Employed.
can jump into business. Yeah.
Okay. For self-employed folks, there's a couple of things to be considering. One is you should have an attorney work with you and help you kind of think about these things. And again, wherever you go, if you are coming from America, wherever you go, Uncle Sam will find you. And so there are just certain things that you have to be aware of in terms of your business. But there's also some benefits that come with that. So one thing that I've learned is if you are American, if you are living outside the country for 300 days out of a 12-month period, you can write off up to 120K, which is like wild. Obviously, you have to track, right, when you're coming and going between you and your new country, but you can write off up to 120K. Something I shared earlier is, there's certain states where, personal income tax, corporate income tax is different. And so that's why you see a lot of companies where they are like in Delaware, right? Because it's like one of those states. So even for me, I have a few businesses. One of my businesses is in Wyoming, which is one of those states. Humanity Centered is located and is centered in Chicago, but I'm going to be moving that to probably South Dakota or Wyoming because of even just tax things, right? So those are like certain things to consider and to learn. How did I learn about those things? Part of it is being in these Facebook groups, especially the entrepreneur specific ones. Part of it's being on Google. Part of it is being on YouTube and just getting curious. I do have an accountant that I've been able to ask questions. I do have an attorney that I've been able to ask questions. But that's a big consideration. If you're self-employed and you're thinking about moving abroad, you have to think about your paperwork and making sure that's in order. So I've been combing through both of my businesses and making sure, the articles of incorporation, I have copies of them, the address is updated. There's a lot of those kind of technical things that I think a lot of people overlook that are like really important. So those are things to be thinking about as well as you are thinking about potentially moving abroad. And again, my vote, and a lot of people do this, if you are deciding to move to Central America or South America, if you are self-employed, have American or European clients because just like financially, it'll just be a much better experience. Switching gears a little bit. And again, don't forget to, yeah, yeah.
Can I just add a couple things on the business front, or are we
Hmm.
switching gears to another topic?
Yeah, go on.
I have a lot to share here. For anyone considering moving to Europe, well, specifically France, but I think this applies to other European countries, you have to be very thoughtful. If you're self-employed and you have a business, you have to be very mindful of how you do business because you can't technically have a US company and not have a local business structure in the country that you're operating in. So this might be different in Mexico and other
It is
Central
different.
American countries. Yeah. Otherwise, it's illegal. And so that's why it's very important to, again, consult a lawyer or like a tax CPA. The way that I did it, definitely don't do it my way because I established like a French company, the equivalent of an LLC. Bad idea. They do have sole proprietorship, which I should have done because the social charges in France, it's a mess. It's a mess. It's very, very, very expensive.
Mhm.
I think the only thing to keep in mind is that if you do have foreign clients, as you're saying, Vivian, so US, Canadian, I guess UK clients, you don't have to deal with value added tax. Like basically you're taxed out of the wazoo if you have a French business. And I think it's the case in other European companies as well, whether it's again sole proprietorship, which is considered a business structure in France. So it's just something to keep in mind that you really have to proceed with a lot of caution because I have lost thousands and thousands of dollars or euros, whatever, by picking the wrong accountant, picking the wrong business structure.
Listen,
But
that's a whole separate
I know, but it's
episode that we could
specific.
both get into.
I know. It's specific to tax optimization because there
Yeah.
is something called the guilty tax as well. If you have a foreign controlled corporation, like a corporation that's abroad, basically US government is going to tax you extra. You're going to get double taxed in multiple countries. It's just do your homework, do your research, and if people have specific questions on that, I'm happy to answer them through my lens. I know we're not going to spend too long here, but I just want to say there's a lot of headaches that you can avoid if you make the right choice from the very, very beginning. So happy to chat on that later if people have questions.
Yeah, and for those who are thinking about starting a small business, like finding an accountant, like a good accountant is so hard. I feel like now I have one, but if you are looking for an accountant and you're kind of thinking about these things, make sure that they have experience working with small businesses. Make sure that they have experience doing taxes with small businesses that are, abroad. So ask all those questions because I promise you it will save you a ton of headache later. You'll also be able to be a lot more strategic in some of your tax strategy. So, but yeah, if you're thinking about this and you, especially again, if you have your own business, get an accountant and get an attorney. That's just wisdom 101. So, and they will save you a lot of money and headache if you do that. But again, and there's a lot of other practical and logistical insights. I know I could speak into some of the things I'm processing through right now, but I'm curious, Sandra, from your perspective, like knowing what you know now, what were some of the overlooked logistical challenges of moving abroad? Yeah.
There's so many things. This is very specific to France. It may not be an issue elsewhere, but we have a chicken and an egg sort of situation sort of happening here with regards to opening a bank account. Like you need an address to get a bank account, but in order to get an apartment, you need to have a bank account. And it becomes this kind of they don't accept Airbnb or all these sorts of things. So it is eventually it works out. But I would say that housing, specifically in this country, but I think it may pertain to other countries as well. It's not like the US. We don't have a credit system here. So
Mm,
you don't have a history of, whether you're someone that is low risk or not in terms of renting and buying is a whole another thing. But here they require lots and lots and lots of documentation from you just to get an apartment, including, last year's worth of tax returns, your pay slips. This is separate from the visa. These are landlords that are asking us, like individuals who are asking for a lot of very intimate data. And expats who come here, expats, immigrants, people from other countries who come here looking for housing don't realize that your US returns, your US payslips, they don't care about that here. They don't count. And so a lot of the times, similar to that person you mentioned, Vivian, the conscience, whatever, person providing assistance, like a lot of people tend to go with local agencies or local people basically who are able to find an apartment for you so that you're able to get the right documentation to open a bank account, to sign up for, health insurance, not health insurance, but social security system, again, specific to France. But it's just something to keep in mind that like you may have to pay like what's called like that expat tax, like to get an apartment, just because there are so many administrative barriers. And I don't want to say that it's xenophobic, but in a way, it kind of is. When you add on top of that, that there is, especially in Western Europe, there's a lot of discrimination against people of color, against foreigners who don't speak French. Again, I can't speak to other European countries, but even just getting an apartment, at least for me, I had a paying job. I had my American pay slips. My company did not help me with this. I was all on my own. I had to stay at this random person's apartment for a month and use their address just to open a bank account. And this was 12 years ago, and I went with my employer. So you can just see that, again, your mileage will vary, but there are logistical things around housing that can make it really difficult to get other administrative things in place. And so this kind of a little bit going into that backup option. But if you know people or you have made really good connections, really rely on those people because a lot of the official kind of administrative things that are out there, they're not going to help you. They're not really designed, especially in France, they're not designed for foreigners. They really focus on protecting citizens.
mhm.
And there are a lot of structural barriers that are built into the system, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. And Alba dropped a note in the comments about Japan because I
Mm.
know Alba's thought about Japan and all the things that go with
Mm.
that. So, but again, the TLDR is each country is different. I think one of the ways to help you with the anxiety of the differences of it is I know I've devoured like a ton of podcasts, a lot of YouTube videos, even just typing in Mexico healthcare system. There's a lot of podcasts about people's experiences, recent, older, just so you have again some like framing and context of how to think about that Within Mexico specifically, I've always recommended people to find someone local that can help you and support you. I dropped in that one guide in the chat that can support you with that. You can also learn about who those people are in your Facebook groups and whatnot. So there's a lot of that. I know some of the things I'm doing to try and anticipate logistical challenges, especially when it comes to moving or where to live, because renting in Querétaro specifically, just like 2.5-ish, 3 hours outside of Mexico City, is different than Chicago. And even just how the neighborhoods are set up. So one of the things I've done, I'm actually in Querétaro right now. So I actually decided to come on a trip here so I can do a neighborhood tour with someone local who helps folks with like relocation and get an understanding of just the different areas, the different prices, what is unique about the different neighborhoods, what to expect from all of that, just so I can have a better idea of where I might want to be. I have a dog. I have a Doberman. So he needs like a lot of exercise. He needs to I need to be able to walk him. So I have to consider that too of where I'm moving. My 2-year-old hairy toddler, as I call him. So I have to think about what does he need. I need to think about costs of doggy daycare, boarding, because sometimes I need to leave, right? Or I just need a break. But there are two ways that I think folks can start to think about some of those logistical things outside of, again, all the Facebook groups. I know when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to banking, taxes, being able to identify who are those local relocation support people have been critical. But also, I know I've been doing just even like research in terms of doggy daycare and like pricing with like getting an understanding of what's the pricing of like daycare versus like boarding, which by the way, it's $9 for daycare and 13 for boarding per night. If you have a dog, you know what that means. So being able to do that, there's a couple ways you could do that. Within my work, I do have an assistant, so she's actually been helping me. But I've also talked to people where they made a list of certain things. So like dentists, wanting to know the cost of dentists, doggy daycare, even like small comfort things, right? Like your nails, your lashes, all of these kinds of things. I know folks who have paid a virtual assistant that they found on Fiverr. They paid them to kind of like go through and make a list of those places, call them and understand costs. So that way they just have some idea and some context of what to expect. Being able to look at what are the products that you typically use, especially for women. There are things related to like makeup or beauty kind of products. There are just certain things that are available in the States that aren't in Mexico, that aren't, in other places. So getting a sense too of what does that look like, what you might want to need to consider. So yeah, those are a lot of those things. And again, logistically, I'm trying to cross my T's and dot my I's. So having conversations with my accountant, trying to think about my paperwork, trying to making sure that I have all of my identification kind of stuff in one place, social security card, birth certificate, and also too, thinking about what are my current financial obligations in the States. I own a home, there's credit card things, right? So thinking about how am I going to handle that? What do I want to do with my home? Do I want to rent it out? Do I want to sell it? I'm actually selling it mostly because I hate my HOA. But so I'm selling my condo. But you have to think about those things. What are you going to do with your car? You're going to sell it? You're going to loan it to a friend? You're going to store it? So one exercise I did was I basically just one day made a list of all the questions, all the things I didn't know. And from there, was able to kind of go back and be, okay, where can I learn that from this relocation support person versus YouTube versus podcasts? And it's just about giving yourself, I guess, an idea of what could happen, but also learning and just accepting that there's going to be a bunch of things you did not anticipate. It's all about acceptance, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. How did you how did you build a new community and support system in your new country? Do you feel like
So
you have community?
so hard to answer that. I've been here 12 years, so I have seen friends come and go. And I think that's the hardest part of living abroad because I speak the language. I am integrated into French culture. That's just the language they use here. They're very obsessed with integration, the concept of integration.
The French.
The French, yeah, I know. I found that even if you speak the language, even if you are integrated into the culture, I have a French passport. I'm a citizen for about 5 years now. I will never be considered French. I'm a perpetual outsider. And so I find that I either naturally or just based on my circumstances, I gravitate to people who are from other countries, even if I do have some local, you could say local French friends who have lived abroad. That's really one of the reasons that we're friends because they know what it's like to live in another country and to have to blend into a culture that's not yours and that doesn't see you as being part of them. And that's going to be very different in other parts of the world. I didn't mention this, but I'm originally from Colombia. So like I come from a culture that's very warm and very open. That's where I was born. My family and I moved to the US when I was 6. And so I already had the cultural shock of moving to the US and the otherness and as a Latino woman, like in the US or girl, I should say, being scared to speak Spanish in public, feeling like you had to assimilate into white American culture, and then living that under a new lens in France and feeling like I'm on the outside. And even if I made connections with expats or with other people from parts of the world who are not French, most of those people left after several years. So it gets back to kind
Mhm.
of that consideration in the very beginning of like, how long are you planning to stay? So I would say that what I've experienced, in my first years, like I spent tons of time going to like expat meetups, like trying to do like even some language exchange just to like even get my fluency higher. Obviously, things have improved over the past 12 years. I went to tons of activities and I found that, there are always great people to meet, but the hardest part is like deep connection and making deep
Mhm.
friendships. And so even now, like I do have friends that I've met over 10 years ago. I'm also single. I don't have children. And so now the center of their worlds is around their families. And so I do find that being very far from family and not having a partner or not having kind of that close friendship group, because I've had it over the years and it has disappeared kind of because people have moved. So I think
Mhm.
that's been one of the hardest parts. I think it'll be different in other parts of the world. It really depends on the culture. I think Germany and Denmark, you're gonna face similar problems. Yeah. Similar challenges in Western Europe, especially in Northern Europe. I think maybe in Portugal, things may be different. In other parts of the world, especially Central South America. I don't want to generalize, but being from that part of the world, you may get received with open arms and lots of curiosity. In France, no. Especially Americans, like, people don't like Americans. Like, if anyone has seen Emily in Paris, you may imagine why, because of the stereotypes, but yeah, that's a long-winded answer, but just saying that, yeah,
No, I appreciate
it's
that.
it's a little tough. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Are you? Because again, I know you're a business owner. Do you know other, like, entrepreneurs there? Have you been able to connect within, like, that community too?
I have, yeah. So I've had the chance to be kind of in different accountability groups, and most of these women were not French or not from France originally. So
Mhm.
I think that that was really helpful, to be honest, because this is something to keep in mind if you are either working for your employer, but from abroad, or you're like what you mentioned, Vivian, you're working with North American clients while living abroad. Like, I am on US time zone. So again, I'm in a part of the world where
Mhm.
we have 6, 7, and even 9-hour difference. So I work with clients on the West Coast and I'm in Paris, like 9 hours apart.
Oh.
So yeah, I work till 8 or 9 PM. And so what I've done is that most of my work and most of my life and community building revolves around like virtual connections. And so
Mm.
I've shifted. In my earlier years, I was spending more time locally, establishing community. And because now my work is so virtual and so international and North America based as well, I find that I'm spending most of my time with entrepreneurs who live in the U, or at least live in other parts of the world. But that's specific to the French market, and I've opted out of the French market. So again, it's unique to my situation.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's an important consideration for folks to think about is you will always, right, have friends outside of where you're moving to, but it is important, right? As you're kind of thinking about those considerations of community and how you want to build that. What are you okay with? What will feel like isolating for you? It's going to look different for each person. I know for me, I'm a part of a couple of different Black in Querétaro, Black in Mexico City kind of groups. And because of that, I also get invited to the Black women WhatsApp groups. So I'm in Querétaro right now, and I've been in these groups for the last couple months. For me, again, being an American, I had to figure out what was my red line. You know what? I think I need to think about something else. And for me, I've been thinking about it for a while, but the kind of like final switch was, I think it was like day 2 of Trump, and I went to whitehouse.gov. If you go to whitehouse.gov, you're greeted by this like propaganda video. It's like eagles and military and, Nazi Hitler vibes. And then the new homepage is like this big picture of Trump about taking America back, leading us into the golden era. And I was just like, that was the moment for me where I was like, no, because we've seen this, right? So that's when I started. So again, so that was in January. So I've been in kind of like a part of these groups since early February, and chatting with people, getting to know people. I came to Querétaro last Saturday, and I've been having lunches, coffees with folks, and just getting to know people. And they're putting me on to certain WhatsApp groups, things to be aware of. They're introducing me to other people, both who are from abroad, who are also local. I love entrepreneurship. I think it's one of the most creative outlets. So I've also been getting involved with entrepreneurial kind of groups, both locally as well as people who are living abroad who are, having their own business. So, and that's just been fun because I'm just learning a lot. I also am single. So I was talking to a friend of mine. She's in Colombia. My reading and writing in Spanish is better than my speaking. And so I asked her, I was like, how did you get better at your Spanish? And she's, well, I just went on the dating apps because you get to practice your language. And then you also get to just learn more about local things. So, and actually, that's something I was thinking through when I was thinking about where I want to move. So I was thinking about Mexico City, I was thinking about Guadalajara, and then Querétaro. And for me, I still want to be open to that, right? So what I did when I was in the States was I did the location switching just to kind of see, right? Like, what's the vibe? So I did like the location switch to Mexico City. I'm like, okay, that could be great. I did the location switch to Guadalajara. I was like, this will not be great. And then I did the location switch to Querétaro. I'm like, okay, this will be fine. So I know, like, I met like a few people from there, and a couple of them are just now like good friends. And so I'm meeting like their friends. I'm getting to know the city. But that's just been like a fun way to get to practice about the language. You're learning more about the city, the area that you might move in. So for those of you who are in that situation, have fun with that. And again, I think it's yeah, for me it's just about like connection and getting to know people and what are the unique ways that I can learn about the culture, about the language. So, but again, I don't know what that will translate to if when I decide to move here. So, but those are things I'm trying to do to get ahead of it, is like building the virtual relationship. So that way when I come here, at least there's something kind of like established. What are you thinking over there, Sandra?
That was commenting in the chat. But yeah, that's so interesting because I feel that I moved here and I mean, dating apps, it was 12 years ago. So I literally went to like language cafes, like it's like language exchange, very old school.
Yeah.
And I think I mean, cross-cultural dating is a whole nother, it's a
And
whole
then
nother topic. Sure, we won't need to go into, but at least now. But yeah, I do find though that it is important to immerse yourself in the culture, and it is something I've seen here, not just with Americans, but people from other parts of the world who come to the country and don't speak the language. And I think there's lots of countries in Europe where you can get away with not learning the local language, and it's not a bad thing. I'm not here to judge it another way, but I do find that your cultural experience is just so much more enriching the more that you immerse yourself, and not in the French integration sort of way, because they really mean assimilation, getting rid of your own culture. I do find that there is, at least for me, like even if I say that most of my friendships here are with foreigners, like to me, the connection to the language is what brought me here. And there's just so much joy and like that soul connection that I've gotten out of going deeper into the language, really understanding the culture and the history, and of course, examining it critically. But I do find that it's kind of really thinking of moving somewhere to become a resident rather than to just live there temporarily or to be, we hear a lot about the digital nomad and you're hopping around from place to place and you're not truly getting in touch with the people and the culture. And again, easier said than done in certain countries where, like Japan or in other, like I mentioned, other European countries where, yeah, the language barrier is going to be a roadblock. But I feel that things are evolving a lot, especially in the past 12 years here. Like I've seen people are more open, even if there's still somewhat of a vendetta against Americans, but there's still a lot of curiosity. And I think that if you can
Mhm.
also practice that curiosity towards people from different culture and try your best to learn the language, and the best way of doing that is through full immersion. And it's going to
Mhm.
be uncomfortable, it's going to be scary, but the gains that you get from that being on the other side of it, yeah, are, at least for me, they've been amazing. So I do
Yeah.
think that's a bright spot of moving abroad, that cultural experience, language experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think if you my I'm biased. I think if you're moving to another country and you don't speak the language, you should learn some of the language or study. Like I know enough to keep my bilingual nephews alive in terms of Spanish when I'm babysitting them, right? But even now, like I'm taking lessons, like I'm studying, I'll continue with lessons when I get here because for me, like Spanish is like really important for me to learn both personally as well as just professionally. With one of my businesses, one of our next markets is Mexico. So I'm like, let me learn Spanish. So, kind of like think about your goals and what's causing you to do that. We're going to do one final question for me and Sandra, and then we're going to jump into live Q&A. So for someone who's in deep research mode, what's one final piece of advice that you would give to help them make an informed decision?
Mhm. Oh my God. I mean, I had thought about this ahead of time, and it's kind of negative, and I was like, I don't want to finish on a negative point, but I would say just slow down, don't make a rash decision. And I think I'm just echoing what you've shared earlier of really immersing yourself in people's lived experiences, but also not just the bright accounts of how amazing it is to live abroad, but like sometimes even the more grayer or like harsher realities of living abroad, because I think that that's what you talked about, like soothing your nervous system and just kind of thinking of, the amount of patience that you need in navigating the administrative and logistical hurdles, especially when you don't have, if you're moving alone, and maybe you're moving with a spouse or with your family, your children, a partner, whatever, it may be different. But when you don't have that support system that you're used to, it can be, there can be a lot of shocks to the system. And I think for me, having lived here as a student, and then having spent 3 months in Dublin the year before, it helped me at least to experience it at a smaller scale and to kind of just prepare myself mentally and emotionally for just the difference in culture and day-to-day life. And I guess it's just because I carry my own immigration trauma from moving to the US as a child and feeling so much discrimination and feeling othered. So I ported all of that with me to France and experienced it, but under a new lens.
Mm,
Because I guess depending on the country that you live in, and again, it's going to be different depending on your identity, your positionality, but every culture, especially outside of the US, just the way that people see race or ethnicity or any other parts of identity is really culturally nuanced.
mhm.
And so I had to, I had so many people telling me, like, you're not Colombian, you're American just because I have an American accent. Whereas in the US, I had so many people telling me, you're not American. Where are you from? What are you? Like, I had that growing up all my life. And so I feel that there are some I had a lot of cultural identity, like issues that
Mhm.
emerged. And I think just kind of looking at kind of what other, not looking, but understanding what other people have gone through, reflecting on your own, like, kind of identity, your journey with your identity, I think is important because those things will, for at least for me, they were amplified by 10x. And I didn't have that support system that I had when I was a kid to work through them. So yeah, just something I wanted to share that I think is important.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And the other nugget I'll dig out of what you were saying too is don't move somewhere that you haven't visited or been to, scout it out, try it out for a little bit, even if it's like a week, right? But yeah, I think my piece of advice is if you are thinking about this, you're curious about it, be remember that not everyone in your life will be a good steward of this idea. They won't. So, you know, I tell folks, you don't need to tell everyone. You don't need to tell that person that you know is just going to project their own fears onto you or talk about what, isn't that dangerous? Or aren't you going to do all these things? This is like the people where you tell your idea, oh, I'm thinking about moving abroad. And they're like, well, there's pros and cons to everything, or there's problems everywhere. Those people are like, just stay away from those people. Because it's, yeah, duh, there's problems everywhere. And that's just their own projection of their own issues, right? So I would encourage folks, if you're actually curious, to be thoughtful of who you share that idea with so you don't let their fear or their sadness over their life kind of get in the way of you exploring what you want. Awesome. I'll say one more thing though, since people are still lingering. I encourage folks to get, at some point, it's not just about a personal decision. At some point, it's just math. So like the reason why a lot of us are still like caught in corporate too, or the golden handcuffs for some of y'all, is because we actually don't have clarity about what is enough. And I think when you actually do that math of what do I actually need financially to live a life that is good? I'm not talking about like eating ramen like week to week, but like when you actually do that math, at least within my experience, and a lot of people I've talked to, they realize that it's actually like less than what is like being paid to them. Now, you need to think about ways that your cost of living has maybe risen, right? In terms of your neighborhood or your house, your mortgage. There's all those things to consider, yes. But for me, what it did was it gave me like a little bit of an emotional cushion to start to dream and be creative about how do I get to where I want to be. So I encourage people to like get like into the math. And it's hard when you're looking at, mortgage, debt, loans, whatever it may be. But that, clarity of what is truly enough is going to be one of the best starting points for you to start to think financially, what do you need to do? Because otherwise you can hear this conversation and just generalize and be like, I can't afford that. But there is a way, but it does mean like a level of kind of like looking at things under the microscope a little bit. Thanks for hanging out with us and diving into some of these real and unfiltered conversations. We know your time is valuable, and so we don't take it for granted. If today's episode made you think, if it challenged you, or gave you something new to consider, we'd love for you to hit that follow button on whatever streaming service you're using. That way, you'll never miss an episode when we drop them. And if you want to go even deeper, sign up for our newsletter at choosecourageinc.com, and you'll get updates on new episodes, access to exclusive freebies, and first dibs on coaching opportunities and other resources to help you make bold moves in your life and business. So we appreciate you, we see you, and we're rooting for you. Until next time, keep choosing courage over comfort, and a friendly reminder to drink some water.